I will introduce our panelists in just a moment. The topic of our conversation today will be the change you want to see, examples from the real world. It's pretty clear we have a tremendous amount of wisdom in the room. We also have wisdom here on our panel, and I'd like to introduce these wise people to you. We're joined by Jim Cavey. Jim is Associate Professor of Rural Development at the University of Queensland in Australia. He has assisted over 120 local communities with community appraisals, community engagement processes, community planning, and economic development strategies. He's an internationally known speaker and author. He's no stranger to the Midwest. He earned a PhD at the University of Wisconsin in community development. Thank you for joining us, Jim.
Pleasure.
Seated beside Jim is Bert Chrzanowski. Bert coined the term Brain Belt to describe the unique human resource and educational assets of Iowa, Nebraska, the upper Midwest, and the Great Plains. Bert is the face of innovation and entrepreneurship of Fairfield, Iowa. He is the president of Fairfield Entrepreneurs Association. For those of you who don't know where Fairfield is located, it's about 300 miles east of Lincoln on Highway 34. Oprah Winfrey called Fairfield, Iowa, the most unusual town in America on her recent Next Chapter TV show. And seated beside Bert is Paul Urich. Paul comes to us from Kearney, Nebraska, where he serves as Chief Executive Officer and Chairman of Expansion, which was founded as an offshore outsourcing company for software products and services. After the creation of Expansion's Rural Quality Assurance and Outsourcing Center in Kearney, Paul quickly learned that the Rural Technology Center and its interaction with the offshore development team was a perfect combination. Paul is a veteran software leader, seasoned entrepreneur, an active supporter of technology and venture communities. Please join me in welcoming these three panelists.
Thank you.
I'd like to start out by asking you a question and have each of you respond to this, if you would. What do you see as the greatest opportunities to create resilient, sustainable rural landscapes, communities, businesses, and people? And Paul, can we start with you? Would that be all right?
Sure.
Thank you.
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank everybody for welcoming us to this panel. It's obviously a very important topic, and sitting in the audience over the last couple of days, it's been very interesting to hear all the ideas and the motivation and the inspiration that you all are creating. I guess before I can answer that, I kind of want to give you a little bit of foundation on kind of what we do, because I think we are possibly a poster child for this, or our company is a poster child for this conference, because we've taken all the different aspects of what you've been talking about over the last couple of days into account. We're a global company. We're a software engineering company. We're headquartered out of Atlanta, Georgia. We own a company in Pune, India. And we have rural offices or rural centers in Kearney, Nebraska, in Loop City, Nebraska, and we recently opened an office in Ames, Iowa. The other thing we're doing is we're moving forward with, in the near future, an office in China. So we do have that global feel. On the other side, we've also leveraged and taken advantage of all the different programs that the state has offered for us to be able to move part of our business here and grow it. So we're involved in the Nebraska Advantage Tax Incentive Program. We've taken advantage of the community block grants. We've taken advantage of the education grants, and we've taken opportunity and advantage of the intern programs. So we have leveraged those programs as much and hopefully the way they were originally intended. The other thing that we've done is we've modeled everything we do. We had an idea that we could develop technology jobs here in Nebraska. So we started out with the individuals that were just basic software testers, the people who pressed the buttons to see if software worked the way it was supposed to. We moved from there to writing automation software, which meant we wrote programs to test programs. And then we moved to actually developing the programs, and then we're doing project management, product management. So, from some of the speakers earlier, you got to have that stair-step approach on how you get to where you want to be. And that's what we've done over the last 4 or 5 years. We have continually raised the bar on what the people in our Kearney office and Loop City office and Ames office do, and we have now been able to take more and more responsibility of that within our office. So that's the way you get that sustainable group, right? You use education to get your resources, or the people that we have working in our company, to the point where they can do things that other people across the world are doing. And if you can do that, you add value. And you add value, you generate revenue. If you generate revenue, you have companies that come and create businesses here because it's all about profitability for a private business.
Excellent, thank you. Bert?
Hi, it's really great to be back in Nebraska. I've been here a few times, and I love the conversation about rural futures. I love the conversation about creating entrepreneurial communities, and also like the conversation about creating rural Renaissance communities. And one of the ideas that I had that tags along the Medici effect is the fact that we have the ability to create some real magic in rural communities by tapping into those intersections of diversity. And if you like, it just so happens I wrote an article about a year ago for the International Economic Development Council Journal on how we turned Fairfield, Iowa into a rural Renaissance city. And it's got some really good ideas in there. And I'm happy to send that to anybody who would like a copy of that by PDF. My information is in the program. What we've done, especially in our community, we've done a lot of work on placemaking, connecting entrepreneurs with each other, and creating a entrepreneurial ecosystem by using what I think are the most important techniques to develop entrepreneurial communities. One is economic gardening. It's really nurturing the entrepreneurial class in your community. And the other one is asset quilting. Asset quilting is part of what we're doing at this event, is really connecting resources, people, money, institutions together in new collaborative ways. And we've taught asset quilting in our community, and almost every meeting, any organization starts with a little bit of asset quilting to create something new, different, and innovative in their communities.
And I'm going to answer your question, Susan, by saying that when I said back in Australia that I was coming to this forum, to the United States, people said, wow, that's amazing, that's fabulous. And I said, well, I'm going to Nebraska. And the reaction was, oh, really? And that's my point. One of the things that we face is that rural, regional is seen as uncool. It's seen as boring, down home, not much happening. And I think that's one of the things that we need to face in fostering stronger communities in rural areas, is the so-called attitudinal capacity that we have, which is seeing rural not just as down home, old-fashioned, this sort of thing, but it is exciting, interesting, fascinating. The things that Bert has just raised, what we heard last night, are examples of great things that happen in rural communities. And the irony is that if you went to New York or LA or Atlanta and said to the commuters that are stuck in the traffic there, how about you move to Fairfield, Iowa? The reaction would be, oh, no way. So how we overcome this attitude about rural areas is one thing. The other aspect of the attitudinal capacity is that there's a lot of self-depreciation that goes on in rural communities. There are a lot of people who talk things down and say, oh, we've got nothing, everything's terrible, it's hopeless, when in fact there are enormous assets there. So one of the opportunities, I think, is turning around the attitudes that people in rural areas have about themselves, how they're perceived by outsiders. And a couple of other things is enthusiasm and passion is really what drives community improvement. Sure, we need infrastructure, we need services, but we need enthusiasm and passion and motivation. And I've done the sums. I reckon an enthusiastic person is worth about $150,000 worth of funding if you want to get things done. So supporting drivers and gateway type people is important. And the final thing I'd say is that big opportunity for us is multi-community collaboration. So we suffer from regional envy. Regional envy is they've got a swimming pool, we want a swimming pool. They've got a tourist attraction, we want a tourist attraction. Instead of actually working together, multi-community collaboration is really about the future of how rural communities are going to be sustainable, in my view.
Could you give us an example of one?
Oh, well, now you're putting me on the spot.
Oh.
Well, I'm adding to the diversity of this conference by coming from so far away, but let me say that many of the issues are so universal. We could be sitting in Australia talking about exactly the same things, exactly the same. So there are communities back home that have really worked on trying to build assets. And so I'll say that there's a small area, it's known as the Scenic Rim. And there are 3 main communities that have been traditional rivals. But in the last, say, 10 years, they have really moved into how they can build off the assets of each other. So they're developing cooperative ways of marketing produce, for example, between each other. They're looking at a regional tourism approach. These sorts of things are happening between communities.
Very good, thank you. So what is the role of higher education in helping rural people, businesses, and communities take full advantage of these opportunities?
You know, for us, the university played a key role. When we, you know, our operation started where we had our corporate offices in Atlanta, we opened the office in India, and so we ran that business for about 4 or 5 years, and quite frankly, we weren't very successful at it. We just came up with all kinds of obstacles. So we needed to find a better way to do what we were doing. And again, we write software. So we write software for major corporations, Turner, Cox Media, Home Depot, Coca-Cola, Delta Airlines. A lot of our clients are in Atlanta, and so you know it's a mecca of large corporations. And guys, they use a lot of software, and they're always looking for ways to develop that software. And you know the trend has been for many years just to throw it offshore, which we saw is really a negative. So you kind of got both sides of the equation on this. You have the fact that we have to compete against the global market and the other countries, but we also have to understand we have to collaborate with them. And my belief is if we try to go toe-to-toe with India and China, with the population centers they have, we probably won't win that war. So you have to figure out how you collaborate with these international countries as much as you try to figure out how to compete with them. And so when we made the decision to open our office in Kearney, and we focused on Kearney because it was a university-based town, it needed to be far enough away for us from Omaha or Lincoln not to have to compete for the labor pool. And so what we found the moment we hit there is, you know, Chancellor Christensen, Kirk Carlson, you know, Dr. Taylor, Dean Birkin, they all jumped on board, and before we even opened the office, they were trying to figure out how that we're going to, how we're going to recruit the resources, what kind of resources they're going to be able to, produce not only short term but long term. And so, it went from that kind of support to the fact that when we bring clients now into the Kearney organization to do the tour, the first place we take them is the university. Chancellor Christensen is such a great salesperson for the community, the university, where it's going to go. And so we run every senior executive that flies into Kearney through the university. Most recently, we've had working with Dean Birking's department to create classes now that the university teaches to get the students prepped to come and work for our company. I mean, how good is that? I mean, if for those of you who are in the business world, education and training is one of the biggest expenses you have, and typically you don't have the luxury of doing it because you're always forced to get to the next stage. If we have the universities teaching our students what we need to have them come out, that's one of the greatest successes we can have. So, we started the internship programs about 4 or 5 years ago. We've ran 14, 15 people through the university system on the internship program. We've hired every one of them. So it's a great feeder for what we do. So I'm not going to say we wouldn't have been able to do what we did without the university support and all the things that they do, but I'm telling you, I would hate to think where we would be. It was more of an accelerator for us than anything else. So it's been a great experience for us.
I've actually started 2 universities. First one is really the anchor in the community I live in. It attracts students from 83 countries. This is a huge avenue of diversity for us. There are now over 100,000 students worldwide. It's Maharishi University Management. It was based upon a foundation of, guess what? interdisciplinary education and consciousness-based education. Recently it fostered the first undergraduate degree in sustainable living in the country, so it's proved to be innovative. A year ago, we had one of the programs I offer in our town, because no one else is doing, I do a local economy summit. And last year we had a lot of people come, and what came out of it was that we've got 19% of the kids growing up in our county grew up in poverty. I said, this is a huge, huge issue, not only for this generation, but for the next generation. So we convened a local youth summit, and what the young people said was, we really need alternative ways to learn, and especially with the college debt crisis, the bubble's going to burst, we need education that's online, that's local, that's relevant. So they said, really what we need is a Fairfield Free University. So we've teamed up with the best local people to teach entrepreneurship, art, to yoga. Major universities now are putting their coursework online, whether it's Harvard now just announced. And the coolest thing that came out in the last couple of weeks is TED Ed. Anybody heard of TED Ed? Good, a few people in here. How many people have heard of TED in here? Quite a few. A lot of people haven't. You need to go to TED.com and TED Ed and see the great ideas that are shared online and in person and convening. I just came back from the TEDx Summit in Doha. They had 650 people from 90 countries talk about diversity and talking about what they can do to foster a relationship with the universities in terms of education, but certainly universities are tremendous resources that could, I think, provide a platform for teaching people economic gardening, could teach people how to asset quilt, really be collaborative, much more collaborative in their thinking, much more creative in their thinking, and really produce the results that we want, do placemaking, and really create a new generation of entrepreneurs, because this whole talk about jobs is scary for me. I know we've got more jobs in our community than people, so we're always recruiting people, but I'm thinking a lot of people are like me, they're not really hireable. They've never been qualified, they've never done anything they've been really qualified for, but I've started like 20 different companies, so I just feel like if I had to go to college or try to figure out what my skill set was to do what I do, I would have never succeeded. I just always thought, oh, I'll just move ahead, but never have done anything that I've ever been qualified for or been trained for. So part of it is to create that culture of trying and failing and trying again, and hopefully have some success along the way.
And what I'd add is that we challenge communities to be innovative, to think differently, to do things differently, and we've talked about that all morning. And yet, how innovative are our universities? How creative are they? In my personal experience is that they've got a lot of room for improvement. I joined a university and I thought, wow, this is going to be a great place of innovation, but there's a long way for us to go. So we have to apply many of the principles we've been talking about with communities out there internally within universities. And this initiative is a great example of innovation within a university system. But we still have a long, long way to go. But I'd also add that the traditional model of a university is to base its research on communities. And often we go out into communities, study them, and bring our information back, write it up, get it in a paper, and it's published and it's all good. But in many ways that's exploiting communities, and certainly our experience has been that lots of communities are being exploited by universities. That would be my personal view. So a lot of what we need to do differently, I think, is around community-partnered research, community-partnered teaching, where a lot of the research and teaching of a university is based on community issues and community needs. And not entirely. We need to push scholarship boundaries and so on beyond that, but a lot of that relies on engagement between universities and communities, genuinely. And the experience of many people is when you go out into rural communities and say, hi, I'm from the university, I'm here to engage with you. the overwhelming reaction is, oh, well, you're irrelevant. So it comes back to the incentives that we talked about earlier. The incentives that are there in universities to genuinely engage and partner with communities are simply not there for many universities. So we have to, within the system, I'm not suggesting we change the system overnight, but we do need to challenge the current incentives that are there.
So from the rural perspective, what are the elements that are needed to sustain long-term partnerships among communities, businesses, higher education, and rural-focused organizations?
Well, that's a lot of connect the dots, obviously. So
Yes, it is.
you kind of, it's building blocks. It's like the speakers earlier said, you got to start small and you got to keep building on it. The first part of it, quite frankly, folks, is the fact we do have to give our young generation, our young people, someplace to go and something to do. We have to give them some hope that they don't have to get the diploma in their hands and they're heading out of state to go try to find great jobs. That was one of the real appealing things that we thought we were bringing, and that it's high tech, right? So we've got our guys working on iPhone applications. They're writing healthcare applications for traveling nurses. They're working on logistics software. They're working on all the things that they think are really cool, right? So if you have an engineer, software engineer coming out of college to work on some of the technologies that we offer with the kind of corporations that we work with is just a great thing, right? That drive then to hire all those people with the jobs then gets the attraction of the other businesses, right? So they try to replicate what we do. Hopefully some of the people that work for us today will go out and start their own companies, right? They're learning so much. People talked earlier about the mentorship. There's no mentorship like you have when you have actually people working within the organization and watching businesses grow. That's the best experience you can get. Fortunately, my son started working with us early and he's ready to go out on his own. But you get that energy and you get that excitement because you see these things happen, and it's in the areas of things that excite them, and they really want to go out and do it on their own, at least the ones with the drive and the inspiration and the motivation to do it. There's some that probably won't, but there's a whole group of people in my office that will. So all these things all tie together. I mean, we're pulling in kids from Arcadia, from Loop City, from Urbana, from Holdridge. I mean, we're getting a lot of these rural, young, bright people. One example is we have one young man that 4 or 5 years ago when we opened up, he was working on an assembly line at Eaton. And he came into our office and he became, a software engineer. He started that first step. Just the other day, one of our major clients, a company called Nuance Communication that does all the voice recognition software, has asked him to be the lead project manager for one of the biggest projects they have going on. And that is all doing the work out of Nebraska and just the skill sets he developed. One of the things that I will testify to, and I've worked all over the world. We had offices in 5 different countries when we were going our first company. We have great resources in Nebraska. I would put our people and our employees toe-to-toe with any place in the world. They're ethical, they work hard, they do what they say, they're very intelligent, and one of the biggest advantages we experience as a company, and I've got 350 people worldwide. One of the biggest advantages we have a company now working in Nebraska is our clients like working with the people in Nebraska. And that might seem like a small thing, but it's not. Because the more they like the people they work with, the better the communication is. The better communication is, the better they're able to execute on what they've been asked to do. That's the problem with offshore. That communication breaks down. But you get people in Nebraska that our clients like working with. When I talked about clients coming here to see our centers in Kearney, they're here all the time. They love getting in front of our people and working with them. So, again, just a lot of different moving parts, but everybody benefits from it. There's a lot of different pieces that need to make work.
Excellent.
I wanted to tell you the title of this session is about kind of examples of change in communities. And I know entrepreneurship and developing an entrepreneurial ecosystem has really been critical for our community, not only for private business, but also for social entrepreneurs. Because young people are thinking of totally different types of business models. They really want to do something great in the world and they'd like to make some money doing it. And so that could be a nonprofit. It could be a for-profit that donates a lot of money to some different cause or whatever. But here's the issue. The issue is that we have to really look at what it takes to really, where we can create jobs. And about half the jobs in this country are created by small businesses. 90% of the jobs in the last 20 years are companies that are less than 5 years old. And even a lot of those companies, a lot of those jobs are in rural communities, believe it or not. It's not necessarily in big cities. So it's not the big companies that are creating jobs. It's the new startups, it's the small startups, and we need to foster this notion that we've got an entrepreneurial class in our community. 100 years ago in Nebraska, the civic leaders were the merchant class. The merchant class have gone the way of the dinosaur to some degree, except for the ones who figured out how to do e-commerce along with the retail business. One of the things that we look at, and I think we can push to the university if they're really going to put up or shut up, is to say, hey, where are you investing? And I bet you anything, the university or the foundation endowments are invested in Wall Street. And one of my current favorite books is Local Dollars, Local Cents, how to shift your money from Wall Street to Main Street to achieve real prosperity. It has a bunch of great ideas on how different strategies that different communities have used, including Fairfield, Iowa, to create an opportunity to support entrepreneurship and small businesses in different ways. I helped found the Iowa Microloan Program because I think it was, I host a conference called the FRED Conference, Focus on Rural Entrepreneurial Development. The first FRED Conference, I said, we need to look at places like Iowa as a third world country, and we need to have some of the financing mechanisms, whether it's micro-enterprise loans or even micro-equity to support a new generation of entrepreneurs, because we're a desert for venture capital. So these are some of the ways to connect, really connect the parts to create an entrepreneurial ecosystem, not only to support for-profits, but also even social entrepreneurs.
So if we're talking about partnerships between businesses, communities, higher education and so on, I'll go back to grassroots, because partnerships are mediated not by agreements necessarily. They're mediated by personal relationships. And what causes a large university to work with a business or a community is the fact that this person knows that person and they get on. And that's what makes things happen. So we have an ironic situation where large businesses and communities and universities have signed MOUs. They've had a ceremony and they've actually signed off on their memorandum of understanding, but that's as far as it goes. There isn't much of substance behind it. But what happens every day is that all the time there are these connections between people and projects that people work on together. So we need to value that, we need to support it, we need to encourage that. Some other things are having mechanisms for dialogue between these different entities, having some process that allows collaboration to occur, and also having incentives and rewards to encourage that kind of behaviour.
I would like to probe a little bit deeper on your examples. You all three of you have some excellent experiences. What are some models that you've seen work that we haven't heard about so far?
You know, I'll again maybe talk a little bit about what we've tried, because every step we take, it is an experiment, right? In the business world, you learn to create your meat, I call it the meat and potatoes part of your business, the one that keeps the lights on and the doors open and payrolls. But then you go out and you try different things. So the Nebraska for us was an experiment. And we started with just a handful of people. But we also try different types of models in trying to build that sustainable approach, right? So the first idea I had was to start at Loop City, population 1,000 people. And I'm glad I didn't do that, because I probably would have failed. We made the decision to start in Kearney, tied to a rural-based university town, where we're going to be able to get the internship program and get some of the individuals around the community that were able to anchor the organization. From there, then we took the model to Loop City and said, could you go to a small town and could you find people within the community that have either that background or that inclination to go towards technology. So we went into Loop City, we opened an office, and we hired a small group of people there. The next piece was to say, can we get people working from homes? And if you understand the business model we were operating, we didn't want to compete in Lincoln and Omaha, but we knew we could if we let them work from home. So the next part of the model was to get home-based people that we could pay them a little bit lower salary to keep ourselves competitive, but still attract some of the people within the urban areas. And then the last part of our model was to go out of state and go to a state like Iowa and say, okay, we knew we could do it in Nebraska, or we did it in Nebraska, now can we start replicating that in different states? And the reason we need to do that is because it needs to be scalable. If, in fact, what we're projecting is that this will be the next generation of offshore, we call it rural sourcing, there will be a demand for a lot of people. In fact, last week we talked to CIOs of these major corporations every day. We had a CIO from a large financial institution just last week say, you've been calling us and talking to us for the last year, you've cost justified everything, we understand your return, your ROI. How difficult would it be for you to hire 1,000 people? Now, we said probably in one state, probably unrealistically, but if we spread that out over 4 or 5 states, one center, 200 people in each one, that's very practical. And that's a kind of scalability, that we would need to be able to show to make this thing real. I had the chance to go to the governor's conference in Omaha a couple weeks ago and had a chance to talk to Governor Snyder out of Michigan. There is a company like ours who went into Detroit, who within a couple of years hired 200 high-tech positions. And that is, we really believe that's the way the trend is going to be. So I just hope that we're positioned well enough so when the rural sourcing model starts replacing part of the offshore model, that we're in the position to take advantage of it.
I wanted to tag something that Jim said earlier about how we really don't give ourselves enough credit for the quality of life, for what the assets that we have are in small communities. And I know the town I live in has gotten some recognition, especially recently. I was in the Middle East, and I mentioned I was from Fairfield, Iowa, and somebody said, oh, I saw the special on Oprah. How many people have seen that? You might want to check out the OWN Network. It's a really great show about Fairfield. Or somebody said, oh, I know students have gone to school there or whatever. We're a small town. But one of the things that I attempted to do in our community was to change the attitude, especially about entrepreneurship and innovation in our community. And I did it in a couple of different ways. I'll just share with you a couple of ideas. One is we give a big award banquet every year for not only the Entrepreneur of the Year, but we also have an Entrepreneur Hall of Fame. And the Entrepreneur Hall of Fame is to really celebrate the innovation in our community for 150 years. Does anybody know where the birthplace of the Iowa State Fair is? Fairfield, Iowa. Anybody know where the first Carnegie Library was? It wasn't in New York or Boston. It was in Fairfield, Iowa. It was the birthplace of the monorail. It was the theater center of the universe in the 20s and 30s. They had the biggest theatrical producing company in the world based in Fairfield, Iowa. So it's not like we were just been innovative for the last 20 or 30 years, but we also did something to really tell these stories, because a lot of people, we need to sort of have everybody be an ambassador of success and entrepreneurship in our community. So last year, on the 30th anniversary of our Fairfield Entrepreneurs Association, which is really our peer-to-peer networking group and really the foundation of support services in our community, we put together the magazine. It's called The Fairfield Edge. It talks about the competitive edge of doing business in Fairfield. It has profiles of 40 or 50 companies, not all the companies in town, but it has the stories that people didn't know about those companies, meaning some of the greenest companies are in Fairfield. And they're not new companies, they're 100-year-old manufacturers who have a commitment to a zero carbon footprint, blew people's minds away. Or some of the energy improvements of some manufacturers in terms of the products that they sell. We didn't create this sort of entrepreneurial branding for you folks in Nebraska. You know who this is for? This is for the people in our town, so they understand what the wealth and the deep assets are and the creative things that are people in our community. It's got the story in here about the Stephen Sondheim Center for the Performing Arts. Anybody ever heard of Stephen Sondheim? He's never been to Fairfield. He is the lyricist who worked with Leonard Bernstein and wrote a real famous play that transformed Broadway. Anybody know the name of it? West Side Story, right. So anyway, Stephen Sondheim had a protege who was living in Fairfield. He said, hey, listen, we've got this really great performing arts center we're going to open up. Would you lend your name to it? We're going to build a foundation of a regional musical theater. Stephen Sondheim says, I love it, yes. And the only other theater named after him, there isn't one on Broadway. It's in the West End in London. So when I travel around the world, if people are interested in theater, I say to folks, have you heard of the Sondheim Center for the Performing Arts? They said, sure, it's in Fairfield, Iowa. So the part of it is the outside branding, but it's really, how do you change the attitudes? How do you get people in your community to be the ambassadors for what your community is all about? And those are just a couple of things that we've done.
I've got an example to share about reframing, rethinking, repositioning communities. We have a community called Barcaldine, which is on the edge of what you guys would call the outback. It's a remote community, quite small, and every winter in the dry season, so to speak, we have lots and lots of what we call grey nomads. People in their senior years, they get a caravan and they go travelling. So a lot of them come through Barcaldine. So it's a tourism opportunity, it's an economic development opportunity, but Barcaldine began a project around grey nomads, and they organised a volunteering project for travelling nomads to come and basically volunteer in Barcaldine. And it started with them, painting a fence or whatever. But then it moved into a business mentoring program. They refurbished their old picture theatre using grey nomad sort of volunteers. They're now doing a historical interpretation of their cemetery. So it's a way of rethinking older tourists, who a lot of them cursed as they held them up on the highway, to being a real asset for their community. And it's not only done great things in terms of business mentoring and support, but it's developed strong links between Barcaldine and many urban communities where those grey nomads originate from. So there are these ongoing relationships between rural and urban as a result of the Grey Nomads project. And there are other examples. For example, the Healthy Communities Network was small towns who developed opportunities for people to do physical activity and so on. Another sort of example of really genuine community engagement and community leadership. But an outstanding example is the Barcaldine Grey Nomads.
Excellent. As you can see, there's a wealth of information here in these three panelists. We'd like to give you an opportunity now to ask some of the questions that are burning in your minds of these panelists. We've got a couple mics around, so if you'd step up, give your name, your organization, and ask your question. Mike Jacobson, hello.
Hello. Looks like Mike is dead, but my name is Mike Jacobson. I'm president of Nebraska Land National Bank in North Platte, Nebraska. I guess we've heard from a lot of people since the conference began, and we're probably at about the halfway point now. I've really appreciated what I've heard here, because I think we've gone from the 30,000 foot level up to now to something that's getting closer to ground level. So I'm going to dumb this down and take us on down to the ground for a little bit and give you some of my perspectives on what I'm seeing as far as rural futures and some necessary steps that need to take place. A little bit about my background. I spent 19 years with the First Commerce Organization, started in Hastings at their bank there, spent 10 years at the National Bank of Commerce in Lincoln, went out to North Platte to run their affiliate there, and then chartered Nebraska Land about 15 years ago. We've now grown it to be the largest market share in North Platte of the 15 banks that are operating in that community. The bank's been very profitable, and we've had a lot of good growth. I would tell you that a lot of that has come back to the fact that we were in a market that I think was very ripe in terms of having the economies of scale, which is something we've heard a lot about, is scale. And it's also 100 miles from anywhere and when I start looking at larger regional areas. One of my concerns is, for years we've talked about where eastern and western Nebraska begin. And my understanding is it used to be 9th Street in Lincoln is where western Nebraska began, and now I think it's 27th Street. Seriously, I mean, that's where based on population, that's where western and eastern Nebraska change. Now, I would tell you that as I start looking at what's vital to keep rural Nebraska alive, it's going to mean that we've got to have more regional centers across the state. We have a branch in Rock Springs, Wyoming. I can tell you that I don't want to live in Rock Springs. In fact, there isn't any amount of money you can pay me to live in Rock Springs, Wyoming, but we do pretty well there with our bank branch. But I would tell you that one of the things I found about Wyoming that they've done very, very well is the state capital is in Cheyenne. Their state university is in Laramie. When you start looking at where their state offices are at, they're in Casper. When you look in Rock Springs, they have their Western Community College. In Torrington, they have their Eastern Community College. Most people have heard of Jackson Hole. They've got a few things going for them there. And then you go on and you look at Sheridan and a handful of other, and then you look at Gillette, Wyoming, which is the home of the Powder River Basin. I've now taken you clear across the geography of Wyoming, and they've dispersed their population around those regional centers. And those small communities survive because they have access to essential services in those regional areas. And what are those? In my mind, it's healthcare, it's education, it's having access to retail, it's having access to the arts, and it's being able to have access to what I consider essential services on a scale that makes sense. And if every community is going to have their own little hospital, none of them are going to be very good. But if they can work cooperatively together and have specialties that can serve that region, I think they've got a chance of surviving not only those regional areas, but also the small communities around them. And I see that happening in North Platte in spades when I start looking at the small communities around North Platte. I would also tell you that when I look at some things that maybe can help drive that, I look at Innovation Campus. Okay, and I credit Chancellor Perlman for his vision on Innovation Campus and the fact that the place to put it was here in Lincoln, because that's where we had the university. It tied our campuses together, but it meant moving the state fairgrounds, a sacred cow, okay? And I'm sure he got plenty of letters along the way about this not being the greatest idea in the world, and there were a lot of people who felt very nostalgic about the state fair. But I think most people would agree that now that it's moved to Grand Island, it's a much better facility. It's very well attended. I think it's brought a new connection to rural Nebraska, and maybe somewhat by accident, we moved something west that I think is going to help revitalize rural Nebraska. And I think if we can continue to think in that way, that everything doesn't have to be in Lincoln and Omaha. There's a reason why the population is moving east. It's because that's where all of the major state facilities and all of the new facilities are at. If we can continue to move west and move on into the state, as we've done with UNK, as we've done with our state college system, but if we can move other services west, I think it's a way that we can hold population out there, we can make regional areas more viable, and we can make the small communities around them areas that can become bedroom communities that need just basic services as opposed to all of the other services that the regional areas would need. So my vision of Nebraska is to do more of that, maybe be a little bit like Wyoming from that model, and ask ourselves, if we're going to create something new on the state level, does it have to be in Lincoln or Omaha? And why can't it move west? And heaven forbid, and for those who don't know it, Scotts Bluff is part of Nebraska, okay? And also, for what it's worth, North Platte is still considered west central Nebraska, at least from the map. So keep that in mind. I would also say one other thing. I've heard a lot about grants and about public assistance and so on. I don't know, there's a lot of state senators in the room here, but I got news for you. I don't think there's money coming from the state and from the federal government. And so I think what we're going to see, and I think what we've heard from the governor and what we've heard from a number in the legislature, is that there will be support for the university. And I think we need to continue to leverage off the university And one last thing, I could never get up and speak publicly without making this statement. We do have a very interesting connection right now with every community in the state of Nebraska and the university, and that is the Extension service. And when you start looking at our Extension centers, when you look at what we've done with our 4-H program and how that's connected, not only in the rural communities with rural students, but with youth in the urban areas. It's probably been the most successful program in terms of making rural Nebraska and rural living viable and pertinent to people in the urban centers. That may not be a shiny new Cadillac, but I can tell you it's a great vehicle that if we spruce it up and continue to utilize the infrastructure that's out there in our extension program, I think we may be amazed at how we can disseminate more information using that existing infrastructure. And with that, I'm going to stop.
Thank you.
Well, we're waiting for someone else to approach the microphone. I'm going to ask our panelists, what about some other models where maybe some state services or federal services have been moved out into a state to create regional development, regional networks?
You know, I think the only thing I've experienced, I spent 20 years of my life in Atlanta, Georgia, and one of the things that I saw that worked very successfully was the Georgia Tech facility has the ATDC Center, Advanced Technology Development Center, and it was an incubator that the university basically started. And one of the things they learned very early in that method was how to bring the private sector in to help them run the incubation. So the technology, the support, came from the university professors and some of the people involved with their students. But then, taking that to the next level where they actually got some of the angel investment, some of the venture capital investment, then came from the private sector. So when it really took off was when you had the university work with the private sector, the people who had the experience in starting organizations and companies, to where it really kind of skyrocketed. So that was just one kind of first-hand experience, and we got very involved in that within the last 5 or 6 years.
Sure, excellent.
So
We've had experiences of changes of government and changes of approaches. So we spend some time regionalising and then we spend some time centralising, and vice versa. And I'm sure a lot of states go through those sorts of experiences, but it's a lot harder to do than it is to say. We've had circumstances where the Department of Agriculture in one of our states moved from the major capital city into a regional provincial city, and the idea was clearly to have the agriculture department out there in the regions, but it caused enormous turmoil. It made it very, very difficult. Lots of people resigned rather than go out there. We've also in our state, the major sort of equivalent of the land-grant university moved its ag and vet faculties or vet departments out to the agricultural college, the rural campus, so to speak. Now that took 10 years to happen because most of the senior academics, the faculty who lived in the main capital city, did not want to move to the rural area. So there are enormous forces that are working against people moving into regional situations. And what I will add too is that there's this trade-off between delivering services to a dispersed population and the cost inefficiencies that are inherently involved in that, and the almost social justice aspects of it, where we have people in communities where there is no doctor, there is only very, very basic health services. And if you have a heart attack there, your chances of survival are going to be much, much less than if you had a heart attack in a regional centre. And it's almost reaching the point now where the rural people deserve, almost from a social justice perspective, similar sorts of services to people who live in larger centres? Or do we as a community put up with the fact that there are going to be different outcomes for people who live in more sparsely populated areas?
Very good. Bert, anything to add to that?
I just wanted to say that I know in Iowa, the state of Iowa had the legislature had authorized some money for microloans. State of Iowa didn't really want to get into that business. We had already set up a nonprofit, so they've outsourced it to Iowa Microloan. Iowa Microloan is just the tip of the iceberg. It's really for people who can't get any other type of financing. You got to be turned bound by the bank. Microloans aren't inexpensive because the default rates are a little bit higher than other types of loans. But one of the things that we built into the Iowa microloan program was a $500 stipend, if you will, or a voucher that those businesses could use for their own consulting services. And we also assigned a mentor and or a mentoring team to support those businesses as they're starting up. And I think that's good, but we really need to do a lot more, whether it's from, I think part of it's going to change securities laws, because the securities laws in this country are really slanted in favor of Wall Street and not moving money to Main Street. And I think that's going to change with the new, some of the new legislation that's just gone through Congress that allow for local unaccredited investors to invest in local businesses in new and different ways. And I'm excited about that. The other thing that we've done, we've leveraged in our state, is they created something called the Great Places. And different cities were designated great places. And what happened was whatever those communities needed, they figured out, did a Kaizen, if you will, with the state agencies. Kaizen means they brought together real diverse types of individuals from different agencies to see what they could contribute in terms of asset building and asset quilting in these communities. And I know in our community, they were attracted to us to really help us accelerate the sustainability, the creativity, the arts in our community, and the entrepreneurship. And we really leveraged that to build some additional infrastructure and really do some placemaking, because what you need for, especially a strong entrepreneurial class, you need to make your communities cool. You need to really support young people to help make your communities cool. And so that is what I have to say about that.
Got a question, please?
Yeah, thank you. I thought us Canadians were supposed to be reticent, but there seems to be not much use of the mic here, so I'm going to break the stereotype and speak again. Okay. I wanted to bring out a response to the question about how do you get communities to work together, and at the same time maybe make a contribution or a suggestion from an example for the organizers of the Rural Futures Institute. One of the things that we have found incredibly successful in both getting communities together and bridging the gap between the university and the local communities is we always hold our conferences, and we've been doing it for 20 years, we always hold them in rural places. We typically get an invitation from a small town. We will hold a conference for 150 or 200 people in a town which has one motel with 39 units and no conference center. I am amazed at how those communities have put together the facilities and made excellent conferences. They run a good part of the program in terms of the actual content material, and they learn a tremendous amount about how to do collaboration amongst their local communities, sometimes out of desperation. But over the 20 years, we've had a big impact just by that simple little, I say simple, but that particular policy. Hold your meetings in a small town. It gets all of the urban people there. We get to see the details of the town, so on.
Thank you.
Before I forget, we can really accelerate the impact of this meeting today. How many people are here on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Foursquare? How many people checked in on Foursquare? I think I'm the mayor of this hotel right now, so you can take the mayorship away from me. You can download those apps. It's okay to pull out your smartphones. You should take a picture of this panel, say, hey, listen, I've listened to some really cool ideas at the Rural Futures Institute. Tweet it, put it on your Facebook page. I know I have. I've put comments on the Rural Futures conference this morning after the meeting. It says, hey, I'm going to be talking about such and such this afternoon. I know there was a few people that liked that on there. I appreciate that. But the fact is that we can use social media to really broadcast and expand this message today. And if you've got a smartphone and don't have an app for tweeting, somebody here can teach you how to do it. Or if you, LinkedIn, I remember joining LinkedIn 10 years ago. There was 1,100 people on LinkedIn. 1,100 people probably joined just since I started talking. It's incredible impact in connecting people, social media. We need to really broadcast the power and even the notion that this is happening. I know I've got Facebook friends all over the world. People are commenting on some of my posts here, or some of my pictures with some of the different speakers that I've put up there. And pictures are even better than just putting in a post.
Very good. Thank you. Roger.
Maybe you just answered my question, but I'm Roger Werbine, a livestock producer from Plattsmouth and a farmer. I haven't heard much about the word synergy here, and I've recognized that across the state, and in my case, livestock production, where facilities that you need in isolated areas are not available for, say, repairs, things like that. How valuable is that in your software development, those kind of things, Kearney, Fairfield, wherever in Nebraska? What's the value of that in terms of interrelationships, human interrelationships, not just the Facebook and the modern technology?
Yeah, you need that face-to-face. There's no doubt about it. There's no substitute for the connection. I lead a lot of programs for entrepreneurs, boot camps, networking and mentoring events. And what I found about entrepreneurs is they don't use social media or even the internet that well. What they're really about is face-to-face meetings. So you need to have that kind of connectivity to really create some magic. You need to get people around the same table.
Any other questions? I see Mark making his way to the microphone.
Yeah, I'll ask a question. University is sometimes, whether rightfully so or not, criticized for going into a community, being there for a very short time, and then they're gone. How do we build long-term relationships with communities in an environment where funding seems to be going down?
I'll start. And we know the overwhelming feedback from communities is that what engages them with large organizations, with universities, with businesses and so on, is personal relationships. And they will say things like, I hate the government, I want nothing to do with the government, but I really like you. And that is how a lot of collaborative work occurs. And so the good and bad news is, the bad news is that a lot of the mechanisms we use for partnerships, joint steering committees, MOUs and things like that, are still useful, but they don't really mediate joint work and collaboration. But the good news is that every day there are people from universities, government, business, that are interacting with rural people every day. And while the institution may not be trusted, the individual certainly is. And so the challenge for businesses and universities and so on is to value the fact that every day there are relationship assets that their staff or their people have with rural people. And it's those relationship assets that need to be recognised, valued, supported and so on. And we know, again, that the overwhelming feedback is that what really makes relationship assets happen is continuity of contact. It's the continuity. So, and what happens in our relationships in rural America is the continuity is broken all the time. Staff move on, things change. And community people say, well, we've only just got you tame and you're moving on. And in fact, we have organisations that vacancy manage, you know. They deploy staff based on organisational requirements and often to balance the bottom line. We've got to balance the budget this year, so we'll manage that vacancy, keep it vacant. So we need to also accept that relationship assets are an incredibly valuable thing for organisations. And so our decisions need to be made not just on the budget and the organisational requirements, but they also need to be based on the relationship assets that we have with rural people. And when you factor that into the equation, we'll be able to justify the continuity of contact much more.
You know, the only thing I'd add to that, and those great comments, is again, going back to, I think the gentleman who spoke earlier talked about, you know, where the rubber hits the road. I mean, we have to take all the things we talk about in a 30,000-foot level, and we got to be able to execute on it. I mean, the part of anything we do is execution. And you know, what I'd love to see this state start figuring out how to do is the incubator concept. We have to try to grab the individuals with the domain experience and the expertise, put them in a place, and let them grow. And that gives them the funding, give them the support, whatever they need. A lot of the successful companies I seen when I was living in Atlanta were really anchored by university professors. Now, I know the chancellors probably don't like to see that the professors leave the campus, but they are usually the most highly educated people in the communities. They have a level of domain experience that's unsurpassed by anybody else you could possibly pull together. And that doesn't mean they need to be the CEOs or the lead. I mean, the interesting thing about an entrepreneur is it doesn't have, you know, an entrepreneur is not one. An entrepreneur is a group of people sometimes that make things happen. So if you get the university or you get the university professor as an anchor of a group that has domain experience, and you can bring the sales expertise and some of the other financial expertise around them to grow it. I mean, and then those people get out in the communities, right? And all of a sudden you've got that university benefit that moved from campus into the community to grow something valuable. And if those companies take off, which many of them have, you know, at least in the Atlanta area, I mean, that's a huge win. And it's a great career path. It's, you know, it creates wealth, and it kind of gives, you know, different avenues to pick up different things.
I'm going to turn to our panelists and ask for each of you to give a summary comment.
I wanted to give some thanks to the organizers to this event. Also, there's a number of people in the room that really I don't think this event wouldn't have happened if they hadn't done the groundbreaking work on community development, wealth transfer, and really helping creating entrepreneurial communities here in Nebraska. And I'm thinking of people like Mylan Wall and Maxine Mall, who are old friends of mine. And I just think Nebraska is really the real important part of the Brain Belt, because we're having this kind of conversation. And this is really valuable, but we really need to link that transfer of wealth to foundations for placemaking, but also find a way to leverage the foundations to really support entrepreneurs and really create vibrant communities, because the rural future is going to be less and less state government, less and less federal government, and we should never really develop institutions or initiatives that are based upon those kind of supports other than the really short term.
I'm going to make a summary that says that what I'm hearing is reaffirming some things that we already know, which is great, and it's also raising things that we need to do differently. I think we're reaffirming the fact that what makes vibrant communities is local enthusiasm, local ownership, passion, organisation, these sorts of things. But we've also raised some things that we need to sort of challenge ourselves about, and that is, how do we get innovation to happen on the ground? How do we change the way we do things, perhaps in universities and large organisations? How do we actually relate to rural people? How do we make this meaningful and accessible out there in rural Nebraska or rural America? So I think they're the things that we need to do differently, and the Rural Futures Institute is just such a wonderful vehicle to start to address some of these things.
Yeah. Well, you know, you guys know I'm a technology guy, and I'm all about businesses and growth. And, you know, right now there are some low-hanging fruit that this state can take advantage of. You know, I told you I was the poster child of this conference, and I really do believe that, because we are a high-growth technology company, appeals to our young folks. We leveraged all the programs that the state government has created for us to be able to accelerate, not necessarily, you know, prop us up, but definitely accelerate, you know, this pace at which a company like ours can grow. We have the relationship with the university, where we actually have not only the basic education that the students come out with, but also the specific education that the students are getting that are tied to our business plan and to our business model and the demands of where those things are going. And then you have the local economic development group, at least in the Kearney area, that has just surpassed itself in trying to do everything they possibly can to promote growth. And that's what it's all about, right? It's not only just kind of planting a seed for something, but once it starts growing, you fertilize it as much as you possibly can to grow it fast, because that fast growth environment not only is a way to generate a lot of wealth and a lot of income, it's also a thing that generates and creates entrepreneurs, because they do learn from that environment. I hope you guys trust me. If you put the right people in these environments, my hope is that expansion out of Kearney will spawn some entrepreneurs doing possibly competitive situations, but there is just a tremendous amount of opportunity in the state. I mean, if somebody like me can come in and start a business and create 20 new jobs every year, and these are high-paying, high-value, high food chain jobs, there are so many other people in this country that could come here, or maybe within this state, and do the same thing and probably 10 times better. So it's a great opportunity for us right now, and there's a void in capturing the rural nature, right, the quality of life. And one of the things I always hope, one of the reasons my wife and I moved back to Nebraska was for the quality of life. We could have lived any place that we wanted to, and we moved back to Nebraska primarily because we liked it here. And the quality of life was so high. And so my hope, when we have sessions like this, is we don't degrade our quality of life. So we need to be able to not only grow, but we need to have the proper growth. And not really affect kind of what makes Nebraska so great. So I guess my overall comment is timing's right. I know you heard that multiple times today, and we just have to be smart enough to take advantage of it.
I think we've heard some excellent comments from the three of you. I would say that for me, this gives me great hope for the opportunities for the Rural Futures Institute. It would seem that in the short term, the grant announcements that were made this morning, the RFA that's going to happen later today, looking at teaching and engagement and research and teaching possibilities, as we look at the interplay of those three missions of the university, it seems like there is opportunity teeming in all of the comments that you mentioned. So the opportunity for impact sounds like it could be very great. I want to thank each of you for joining us today. Thank you for your excellent comments. And so did the audience just go on Facebook, Bert? Is that what we just did?
You are. You're all going to be on Facebook and LinkedIn today. I'm going to tweet you all. So you're going to have to go on there and tag yourself. So I'm not sure where everybody's sitting.